All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It is Wednesday. It is hump day. To get you over the hump, we are Lanky and the OddCrapple. We are going to be touching on some fun subjects, but some very serious ones as well. I believe that both of them could kind of go hand in hand with each other. Um, so I just felt that there needed to be a discussion about these because they speak to the possibility of something that we could face if we're not more proactive and aware of, you know, what we are doing as, people. So, uh, the other day, I came across a video, and I'll link it below after the stream ends. Uh, it was from Subverse News on YouTube, and they were talking about the um, specifically a study that was done in Japan, where men have seemingly become disconnected from um, the social aspect of society and have become shut-ins. Um, and it was intriguing because I see, similar things happening here in the US. And so I wanted to kind of deep dive, or at least maybe not deep dive because I don't know how far down I can swim, uh, but dive into, the possibilities of, what might be causing this, how responsible, we are for allowing it to happen, and if we can reverse course and bring things back to where everybody is, interacting in a healthy way. Um, so let me get the actual name of the video just for everybody if you want to uh, reference it while we're talking. Um, Young men are becoming isolated from society. And it's, like I said, it's from Subverse News on YouTube. Um, I feel like it's not as simple as, you know, what we could potentially come up with as, reasons. I think it's a lot deeper than that. And basically, based on, the research that Lanky and I have done, I think we might have some understanding um, beyond what we would normally think. Um, so I don't know. I'm gonna throw it to you, Lanky. What
Hmm.
what's your perspective based on you know the video and anything you've read? Because I know that there were statistics in there, and like I said, the original study was done in Japan, but they did see a correlation with certain um, aspects of the study that could be applied to men here in um, the U.S.
Yeah. Well, the article mentioned in that study was from the Guardian, uh, and actually, it's an opinion piece. Its title is "After El Paso and Dayton, the left needs to reach out to men, not condemn them," by journalist Iman Imrani, and it speaks about this I guess isolationist mentality. And again, it focuses mostly on men. Um, kind of finding their niche within whatever tribe they find themselves in this tribalistic society of ours. And yeah, it mentions the need, at least on a broader scope, to
Yeah.
find purpose and meaning in life. Um, and sadly, some of these men, um, and I'm guessing with more violent tendencies, tend to find it in this terrorist mentality. And again, this is the worst of the worst
Well,
case
I
scenarios.
I'd be careful. What I'm at, I know what article you're basing it on, but I wanted to start out basically what your interpretation of the Subverse video was, the one talking about the initial study, before we kind of deep dive into that particular article that came from that Tim Pool was talking about.
Okay. Then yeah, in that case, the video is a little lighter, for what it's worth. It speaks mostly just about men becoming disengaged from society, mostly by choice. Uh, but again, there are factors at play that um, render them at least seemingly helpless uh, to combat, whether it be social, economic, maybe even political. Uh, but yeah, and in Japan, these guys are finding solace in isolation, and they spend their days at the computer. Probably like the worst versions of escapism. Gaming, YouTubing to no end. And not really socializing, not engaging with society.
It's
Uh,
weird how topics that we cover tie into other topics that we've covered. Like I didn't even think about the escapism type of thing until you just mentioned it. That's amazing how we've covered topics in the in previous episodes.
it all builds up.
Yeah, that all kind of relates, and I like that, but it's funny to see how you know how it relates like that.
Yeah. But again, the both the study and this article kind of ask very existential questions on how does somebody find purpose and meaning to their life when they aren't able to. And I guess to tie it back to another episode we did, how do you become self-actualized when you live in a society or an economy,
Hmm.
uh, or perhaps even a government that subdues uh, that desire?
Yeah.
Um, and I guess that kind of leaves us in a place where how do we find meaning?
Hmm.
Um, and and again, we're not social scientists, we're not anthropologists, we're just uh,
We're,
podcasters.
but the thing is, I think you have to really break down to its very basic elements that anthropologists and those that you mentioned, at the end of the day, they're all just people too. It doesn't matter what your education level is, it doesn't matter what your status is. You can still feel, based on how society is behaving around you, you can feel like you need to isolate yourself to protect yourself.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I mean, we don't have statistics or studies on hand, uh, but knowing that this problem does exist, uh, I think it actually calls upon all of us to be able to show compassion to other people who do feel isolated and left out of society,
Mhm.
whether it be young, old, male, female, anybody. But it seems like in this current environment, there seem to be more problems with a larger group of men feeling like they're outcasts, they're isolated from society. Um, and what can we do to help bring them back in? be like, hey, you're here for a reason. You
Yeah.
do have a purpose.
And
We
I
want you here.
know that when we were discussing this a few days ago, that I pushed pretty hard on um, your insistence on relating it to, women, because the study was done about men. So I know I pushed pretty hard, pushed against that, insistence on mentioning women. I do understand the importance of it, but I think the one thing that um, is not really discussed is the fact that um, men aren't really men have never really been, up until probably the last decade or so, even have never really been comfortable outwardly expressing themselves. So they don't feel like they have an outlet without, being accused of being weak. So I think that's why they internalize things and become, they withdraw into themselves. And if you think about it, from when we were growing up in like the late 80s, early 90s, and even into our teenage years, if you really think about it, from the beginning of when video games were a thing until now, the stigma of, a guy being in a room playing video games is still that, he's immature, or he's, less than, or he's weak. And I don't I think the stigma that society places on, you know, men or women, but specifically men for the sake of this argument, I think the stigma is that men don't feel like they can outwardly express certain things, so they need to find a way to kind of figure it out in their own head and not really involve other people, because involving other people involves other or it makes you involve other perspectives that may be completely, wrong based on what you're dealing with. Because if you're trying to figure out what you're dealing with, hearing somebody else give you their opinion before you really know what you're dealing with could be detrimental. And I think that's why this whole isolationism is happening. I actually had a video that I was going to do several months ago, individually, that was about isolationism and how, um, and this was more from a political level, that people were, uh, you know, complaining about the country as a whole becoming isolationist, but they didn't really break it down to its basic levels and understand that with the existence of the internet and the existence of social media, we actually have the practice of isolationism has become common, but it's just not on a grand scale, because people refuse to be in social settings anymore. They would rather be in front of their computer interacting that way, because it's a safer environment for them because of the way that people behave. And so I think that we need, instead of looking at something, you know, on the grander scale, we need to break it down to its most basic elements to understand the larger picture.
And that's okay. Yeah, you brought up a couple good points there. First off, I just want to mention, um, we're still animals.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I hate to say it, we have not evolved in what, 250,000 years,
Yeah, because
300,000
if
somewhere.
you think about biology class, they talk about like I don't know, I forgot what it was called, and my ninth grade biology teacher would hate me for this, but it's like the kingdom, phylum, class, genus, order, species. I forget what that's actually called, but we are still in the category of Animalia. which is, at its root is animal.
Yeah.
So I think that, people need to start not denying science as much as they have been the last 5 years. Like they need to understand that science is a real thing and science can be proved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that we need to lean more on science than the crap that we hear on Tumblr.
Yeah, that would help. But with that said, uh, we are a very emotional animal.
Hmm.
And again, whether male or female, and luckily we all have this thing called a cerebrum, where we can, think more complex thoughts. But deep down, we still feel things. And um, you mentioned, isolationism.
Hmm.
Uh, I know for a fact, the world can be very overwhelming.
Hmm.
And sometimes, no matter who you are, you need to kind of step out of that and maybe just, keep yourself separated, work on yourself, relax, do something you enjoy to get your mind back in the game, so to speak. Um, and I would say there's a thing called, healthy isolationism,
Hmm.
where you use that time and space to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And I would say that's a good thing. We all need to take a break from life every once in a while. It becomes toxic when you don't work on yourself. You're just in your own time and space for the sake of uh, distraction or escaping. And I guess I don't want to say ruminate because, well, I guess maybe that can be toxic or healthy depending on what you're ruminating about.
Hmm.
Uh, but when you become stuck in your own mind, um, and you focus on toxic ideas that may have brought you to that time and space of isolationism, it can be dangerous because your thoughts just grow and grow and grow. Um, and eventually you need other people and a, a, a social pipeline to kind of bring yourself full circle,
Yeah. Um,
because it's a world. It's not just an inner space.
yeah,
There's
and you actually said something that brought up something in my mind. You talked about needing space. And I think that that's a natural thing. Like you need to be able to separate yourself, but not to the extent that you can't reintegrate yourself.
Mm,
And I'll put this in the description after we upload or after the video goes to a video on demand. But the current season of America's Got Talent is airing, and it aired last night. Or one of the episodes that started the live performances aired last night. And there's this young girl named Sophie Pecora, and she's a singer. And the song that she sang was an original, and it talks about being able to understand yourself, but giving yourself the space necessary to be able to do that. And when you just said, people needing space, I think that it's really, yeah. Do you see those things that go around Facebook that talk about, it has like a cabin in the woods, and it says, if you could get rid of your phone, rid of the internet, and rid of all interaction for a month, you'll get like $1 million.
mm.
It's like I don't think that the incentive should be you'll get $1 million. Yes, that's nice, but I think that the incentive should be if you really could rediscover yourself, would you do it?
And honestly, yeah. When I think of uh, okay, well, like Henry David Thoreau,
Hmm.
he spent time, in the woods, thinking, writing. And he became one of the most prominent American philosophers in history. And he was alone for a long time. But I would argue prior to that self-inflicted hermitage or isolationism, whatever you want, he
Self-imposed, not self-inflicted, because
so,
self-inflicted sounds like he wounded himself. I would say self-imposed because
fair enough.
it's like a self-imposed exile.
Yeah. Semantics. But yeah, but prior to that point, he already had a purpose in mind.
Yeah.
He wanted to write, to think, to express his ideas, and sort of change the status quo.
Yeah.
His whole, civil disobedience was essentially the viral meme at the time. It was a very long essay that was designed to empower the people in the face of a corrupt government at the time, which is, philosophy is always relevant. So
Yes.
I would argue. And
Philosophy, I see philosophy much the way I see music. It's kind of timeless, because I think philosophy, I mean, regardless of how far we advance as humans, I think that even the oldest philosophies can still be I mean, and it even shows today that the oldest philosophies can still be relevant, but they can evolve just like we do.
yeah, what is truth? We still have no answer to that.
Right.
Of course, we have an intuitive working definition, but
Yeah.
yeah, I tell you, the volumes and the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it just it goes on forever. But yeah, so so then the crux of it again comes to, how do you find a purpose in a life that, I hate to say, kind of devalues the search for meaning, the search for purpose, the search for self-actualization, because in this economy, we are taught that it is beneficial for everyone if we remain a cog in a machine. If we are helping to make money for someone else, then that's our purpose. That's how we drive society forward, because that's what everyone can do, and money is easily quantifiable.
One
So
thing one thing that I want to touch on based on that, um, how if you were tasked with, and this actually goes back to another episode that we just did about, writing a speech. If you were tasked with giving a TED talk, you know what TED talks are.
yep.
If you were tasked with giving a TED talk kind of, for the purpose of motivating people to see that while we want to work as a collective cog in this greater machine for a greater purpose, how would you encourage people to still look at themselves as an individual cog that can help that larger cog? Because I think we're losing our individuality, and I think that's a lot of what the problem is that we're made to think that we have to function as a global society, and that's the only way that we can function. But I think that to be able to function properly, we still need to acknowledge that we are individual cogs that can help bring together a larger cog.
Yeah. Again, that's a very big question.
Well, you're the philosopher, so I figured if anybody could, bring that, bring that forward, bring that sort of sentiment forward, it could be you.
uh, Well, I know last week I did mention the acknowledging of, or I guess the acknowledgement that suffering exists in the world is kind of the first step toward finding a larger purpose.
Hmm.
For one thing, we're all in it together.
Hmm.
So if one person is suffering, then all of us are suffering in some way as well. and it's, as a society, it's all of our duties to kind of help
But
bring
how do
other
we?
people.
But how do we? Because if that one person is suffering, it's because something directly affected them. If we feel for them, if we have empathy for them, how do we still? This goes back to what we were talking about before um, the stream. How do we look at something with logic and reasoning to be able to help them without becoming emotional ourselves? Because yes, we to connect to them, we can get emotional, but I think we still have to approach things with logic and reasoning so that what we're dealing with doesn't completely take over us.
Yeah. I would argue, because we both, no matter who you are, if you're a human, you
Hmm.
need both emotion and intelligence. Uh, and I would say, if you see somebody suffering, on the side of the road, or something like that, it is our compassion that drives us to comfort and seek out a problem. It's our anger, our indignance at injustice that gives us the energy to make change. And
Hmm.
then it's our intelligence, our logic and reasoning to identify that problem.
Hmm.
So I would argue, and again, it takes communication, to find out what the problem is, and then see how you as an individual can change it, and then see how people in general can change it. Because if it's something based on policy, then it's going to take a lot of people to change it. But
Hmm.
if if their car broke down and you know how to change a flat tire or something, then there you go, you know how to do it.
Right.
And then the individual can be empowered to help. Um, so I guess, yeah, in that situation, or maybe in the broader scheme of things, uh, if we educate ourselves,
Hmm.
and remain, at least try to empower ourselves to help whenever we're able to. I mean, not everyone can know everything, uh,
Right.
but each of us,
Unless you're Sheldon Cooper, because he claims to know everything.
yes, those very few people, unique. But yeah, I, at the very least, no matter what the problem there is, people can still comfort each other and stick together.
Yeah.
And that can be done no matter what skill level you are.
Hmm.
And then the the onus is on everyone to find a solution to make this problem not happen again.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of the points of government. That's why we have a government, because we have a more powerful, impartial third party to kind of regulate things, and make sure everyone's treated fairly, on an even keel, that sort of thing. But again, some people can slip through the cracks, and we find issues. And that's where it takes people to come together to make things better for everybody.
Yeah.
So, and that inherently is a social purpose,
Hmm.
which I think a lot of us forget about, especially within the age of YouTube and TV and that sort of thing, and games, and we have a lot of distractions uh, in the face of a very tough economic system, where we are told we have to wake up every morning at 5, 6, 7 a.m. Work 8 hours, work 10 hours. Oh, the computers are down. Well, we got to pull a 16-hour day. Um, it's we are given this busy work, and we are not given the chance to think about what we actually want in life,
Hmm.
how to make the world a better place, and we're seldom given time to do so.
Hmm.
Because once we get, best case scenario, an 8-hour day at work, all we want to do is sit back, relax, and just forget about it, sleep, and then wake up the next morning to go to work. Um,
One thing that you said actually just put a light in my head. You said talking about making the world a better place. Going back to what I said previously about looking at things from the most basic, you know, perspective, do you think that there's still value in making your own individual world a better place before you can help the larger, you know, the larger world, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm always of the mind. Um, Life is kind of like, oh, I guess it's a bad analogy, but okay. So if an airplane's going down, and uh, the
Oh boy.
and the oxygen masks fall, you want to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then whoever else needs one.
Yeah,
Because you can't help anyone if you're dead.
right.
So there is an element of self care uh, throughout anyone's life. I mean,
Although I will say that if there's a really beautiful redhead sitting next to me, I'm gonna give her the oxygen mask before I put it on myself.
ah,
That's just me though.
they're like, oh, here, take mine.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I again, as much, in my youth, as much as I wanted to find, the perfect selfless hero, that's impossible because the perfectly selfless person would eventually die of starvation.
I don't and I
Um,
don't and I don't think the perfectly selfless hero, I don't think that's a thing because I don't think if you are completely selfless, you have the ability to become a hero. I think that I think even heroes have to think selfishly so that they can be able to help others. Like they have, like even Superman, he has to figure out how to approach something where he's not going to get hurt before he can help so that he can adequately help somebody not get hurt. Like yes, he has less of a concern of getting hurt because of, he's not necessarily human, but he also has to take his own well-being into consideration because I do believe that in the comics there is one point where Superman does die.
oh, interesting. But you bring up another good point though that so within this conversation of heroics, um, the hero does have to sacrifice something, at the very least his time,
Hmm.
at the very most hypothetically his or her life.
Right.
But when you do step in to help someone, when you do play the hero, there is something at stake. Like there is a cost to something.
Hmm.
And if you're
If you look at it from the perspective of Avengers, when Infinity War came out, Vision put his life on the line to save Wanda, Scarlet Witch. But then when Thanos was trying to get the gem from Vision's forehead, he had told Wanda previously, if that happens, you need to make sure that I am no longer living because that gem won't be useful. Granted, we now know that Thanos was able to reverse time and get the stone where it worked for him, but he sacrificed him. He does selfless things, but he knew what would happen to him in an effort to save other people.
right, and for a completely selfless person, what is there to sacrifice if there's no self?
Right. You have to
So,
because I I think I think a selfless person who like you said, doesn't have a sense of self. So I think that they are the type that will run into a burning building without knowing what's inside that burning building, and there's an old song that my mom used to have me listen to when I was growing up. I think it's called "Billy, Don't Be a Hero," or it might be called something different, but that's one of the lyrics in it. It says, "Billy, don't be a hero, don't be a fool with your life." It's what it's talking about is a girl is asking her boyfriend not to enlist in the military because he's going he's going to end up being shipped off to war, and ultimately, her worst fear comes true when she has people or military personnel show up at her door and tell her that her boyfriend died in the midst of the war. But he had a sense of self, knowing what he was walking into, and knowing that he wasn't infallible, he wasn't invincible, but he knew that what he was doing was going to help the greater good.
Yeah. So I would say all the greater the sacrifice when there's a proper sense of self.
Hmm.
And I guess going back to, finding purpose, finding meaning, you do need to find yourself within a greater context
Hmm.
in order to, be empowered enough to play the hero. And I'm sorry to say, society currently doesn't really give us too many options for that, at least within the worlds we find ourselves.
And that actually brings me to what I wanted to mention. And uh, to stay within the construct of what we're talking about, I want to know what your thoughts are as far as going back to the original study that was done where men are feeling disconnected and disenfranchised from the social society as a whole. In like analytical From an analytical standpoint, what are your thoughts as far as mainstream media, social media, feminism, politics? um what's your perspective as far as how those affect how we behave right now?
God, honestly, I'm a very all of the above uh, mentality on
Hmm.
this sort of thing, because it's a very nuanced issue. Uh, and again, I would love for the video, the article, to. They're not going to be able to pinpoint why exactly, because again, a lot of factors. But I wish they would describe more of as to why
but
these people are isolating
But
themselves.
I will say that, just like we were talking about before we started the stream, if you want to just basically get the basic facts out there so that you're not doing a story, especially on YouTube, you're not doing a story that creates a video that's 2 or 3 hours long. We are already doing, a 90-minute stream and a 90-minute video. So just to basically look at it from the most basic, approach, what would you say in your interpretation are the reasons that these things affect us? Like, how are they manifesting today that are affecting, this study to need to have been done? Because even though it was done in Japan, there are statistics that show that there is correlation here in the US.
Uh, and I would argue it's it's most definitely environmental, because there's something these men want to withdraw from,
Mhm.
and if this environment X is, they perceive it to be, toxic in some way, that's going to be proper motivation to leave it. I mean, that's survival, I guess, technically speaking. Um, but uh, and again, I think we alluded to this earlier. There are, social, economic, educational, political, you know, probably any other factor we can think of
Basically,
is
what you're
probably
saying, it's not a one size fits all answer.
no.
And I don't, and I think that's the problem that we face today is we think that society and humans, that it's a one size fits all remedy, and you can't have that if you're having people as individuals, because you're not going to be able to treat one person the same way you treat another.
No. Again, people are even more varied and nuanced than the systems at play.
Mhm.
So I mean, life in general is a very delicate, you know, was it rope walk?
Tightrope walk, yeah.
Yeah, tightrope. Yeah. Um,
I don't know. I've never experienced that because wheelchairs don't go on tight ropes.
see, you got the advantage. You got
I don't
wheels.
know. I don't know. I don't know. I think I'm crazy enough to actually try it.
But yeah, cause I know for my part, uh, I find myself withdrawing from society just because I pay attention. Whenever I read the news or, or hell, back in the day when I was working at a job I didn't quite enjoy,
Mhm.
I just saw people treating each other like shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, people are not being good to each other. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I
Yeah.
so and I kind of took the time to, work on myself,
Mhm.
kind of get my mind in a better place and uh you know, I can't say, forgive and forget, but forgive and remember and then find some meaning to it.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think as a general rule, life can be very frustrating.
I think
And
I like the fact that you brought up forgive and forget because I think forgive and forget, you and I heard that growing up all the time. But I think that even our parents telling us that, I don't even think they believe that because at least, especially with what we're seeing today, um, there's that whole concept of um, the more that we forget about history, the more we're doomed to repeat it.
yes,
So I don't think that forgive and forget is something that's healthy. I think that you need to forgive for your own health. Like
yeah,
like a lot of the movies that I've seen lately where there's been something that's happened against somebody else, the person that it happened against will say, "I forgive you, but I'm forgiving you for my own health, like for my own well-being." And I think that that's ultimately because I don't think that if especially considering the magnitude of what somebody has done to you, I don't think that some people deserve forgiveness, but I think that forgiveness needs to happen for your own personal well-being.
yeah, I would argue that a peace of mind,
Yeah,
because but also, if you just forget, then you're not going to learn anything. And if something hit you that hard, then it's definitely worth learning from.
and
For one thing,
if you forget, there's Prevagen.
yeah,
I think we should find a way to throw that into every podcast just because it's such an inside joke between us. I think we should find a way to throw that in
advertising
every
revenue,
yeah. Yeah,
Prevagen.
I gotta remember to contact them to see if they can or if they'll sponsor us.
But yeah, but since life can be very frustrating,
Mhm.
uh, and with fewer and fewer outlets
Yeah,
to take out those frustrations, um, I mean, on a I guess, with the more darker aspect of withdrawing from society, frustrations can build up and fester and either become maybe a mental illness, but also resentment and
Mhm.
feelings of animosity. Um, and again, that kind of what I spoke earlier to about when you're left alone with your toxic thoughts, they become more toxic,
Mhm.
and I don't wish that on anyone.
Right.
I'm very much against isolating criminals. That's that's not helping any issue.
Right.
And I feel like if you're going to isolate yourself, it needs to be a choice.
Mhm.
Um, but again, you don't do it for very long. Um, Everyone needs a little bit of the outside world to
Yeah.
remind them that it's not just them in this
Yeah.
world. They're not alone. And
To kind of build on something you said, going back to um, when we were talking about men being in their room playing video games, there was actually a study done recently, and I believe a couple of YouTubers actually talked about it more in the gaming community than in the commentary community, but they talked about it where there was a study done that showed that there was less of a chance of somebody who played a shoot 'em up game. There was less of a chance that they were going to actually take that into real world perspective. Like they weren't going to. They said that most people who play those type of games will, if they have a frustrating day at work, they'll come home, they'll throw on their PS4, they'll play one of those games, and they'll decompress that way, and they'll be fine after they release their anger that way. The people that act out in such a way where it harms other people who actually exist, they're more often than not, they're going to be the type of people who don't know how to channel their anger into something productive. Now, I know that the argument could be made that playing video games is not productive, but if I think if it keeps you from being realistically physically violent against another person, I think that they are very effective.
yeah, and again, there is no correlation. There's no causation related to gaming and violence.
Mhm.
That's been scientifically proven. And if you want to pay attention to science, then there you go.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know I know that there's only a few, years difference between us, but do you remember? And I did a report on this in school. Have you ever heard of the PMRC, or Parents Music Resource Center? No.
no, that's
Okay, it was started in 1985, I believe it was 1985, by Tipper Gore. She and a bunch of parents, well, the wives of other elected officials, got together because at the time, I think Twisted Sister had just released their first album, and the ladies in the PMRC were very much against it, what it was saying. So they actually got a bunch of albums together, like from Twisted Sister, from Judas Priest, from Ozzy. Back then it was Black Sabbath, but um, you know, and even Frank Zappa, Frank freaking Zappa, who did mostly instrumental stuff. Um, they got a bunch of albums together to prove their case that music was making people uh, act act out violently, and that was the cause of what we now see, even though a lot of CDs aren't sold anymore. That was the cause of the parental guidance label that started that. And the reason I bring up Frank Zappa, the very first album that ever had um, the parental advisory sticker was a Frank Zappa album. The entire album was instrumental,
huh, well,
and
it's able to discriminate.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, I mean, art in any form is a way of, venting your frustrations and kind of expressing emotion. People who are artists or people who consume art, in this case, people who are listeners of music, they typically will listen to music the same reason that people will play video games, to decompress.
Uh,
The average person listening to music, even if it's violent music, it's not that they are listening to it to get ideas to become violent. It's they're listening to it because they can relate to what it's saying. Just like any medium of art, you relate to it because you understand the message that it's, you know, portraying. Um, but that was literally the report that I did was for a current events class in my 11th grade year, I think it was. And it was, I shit you not, it was the only thing in my entire school career that I got an A plus on.
well, congratulations.
And you know what? I wish I still had that because I would love to reread it and see how ridiculous it probably sounds to 34-year-old me.
You know,
Um, eh, I don't understand why when you find something that helps you channel your frustrations or channel your emotions, it doesn't even have to be frustrations. But when you find something that helps you channel your emotions, I don't understand people's argument that says, "Oh, that's a bad thing because it's making them think a certain way." No, it's making me think logically again, or at least
uh,
in my case with music, when I'm going through something, it helps me think logically again.
and I have to admit that there is a difference. Actually, there's a big difference between thinking something and doing something.
Right.
All of us have dreams and nightmares and that sort of thing, but that doesn't make it a reality.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Do you remember the I don't know if it's a rumor or if it's actually true because I've never tried it. Do you remember the rumor that went around? I believe it was about the Beatles' White Album, and there was this old wives' tale that said if you played it backwards on a record player, you could hear John Lennon say, "I killed Paul."
oh, I've I think I've heard of something like that. And I
There was
know
it blows my mind how people can, come up with these cockamamie, you know, misinterpretations of things because there was a have you ever heard oh, what is it? It's a song by the Bee Gees called Tragedy.
I I might have heard it, but I can't place
Well,
it.
there's a an auditory effect that they have in that song that sounds like an explosion. Now, to somebody who's not familiar with that song, they'll probably think that it's just a recording of an explosion that they used for that song, when actually it's the singer putting his mouth up to the mic as close as he can get it and going, that's literally all it is. And the reason I bring that up is because um, I believe it was a Judas Priest song that they were arguing in court when Tipper Gore was trying to get the parental advisory sticker on. Um, I believe they were arguing against a Judas Priest song or no, was it Ozzy? I don't know, one of those two. But they swore that an instrumental sound was actually a voice saying, get the gun, shoot, shoot, shoot."
Huh,
And so many sound engineers have been able to debunk that, but people still argue it.
interesting.
And it blows my mind how people can interpret something based on their own emotions. And that's why I was arguing that, well, I wasn't trying to argue, but that's why I was saying earlier how I don't think that it's helpful at all to approach something purely from an emotional standpoint, because
Mm.
you can't. I think your emotions, because they say always listen to your brain, not your heart, because your heart is going to mislead you. I think that if you approach something purely, based on your emotions, you're going to be irrational. You're
Mm.
going to interpret it irrationally.
Yeah, and God, because I mean, art speaks to people in so many ways.
And I mean, you yourself
Um,
are an artist, so I'm curious to know what you think about all of this.
oh well, I'm of the mind that uh, violence is driven by violent people. It's not people who play violent video games or those with a mental illness or what have you. It's people are intentionally violent,
Hmm.
and or those people. I probably should say, because not everyone's like that. But when and again, I'm not sure where they find themselves in life, but if they are in this tribalistic mentality or something
Hmm.
that drives them to make that choice to be violent, it's not the music they listen to or the video games they play. It's their environment.
Hmm.
They whoever they surround themselves with or their own toxic ideas. Um, so I'm always a little offended when people blame music or art or mental illness or what have you on people being violent, because it it's violent people. It's not these video games, not these art
I,
media that.
I do think, and I'm not a professional. I do think that if somebody has a propensity for violence, oftentimes it's hereditary. Um, because the argument, if somebody's going to use the argument that if you grow up seeing violence like in the home, that you're going to be violent, that would also make the argument if you see violence in a video game, you're going to become violent. That would also make that true, which we know that statistically it's not true for the video games. I do think that if you see people that you look up to and that influence you, I do think that if you see people in that way that end up being violent, you might be more inclined to have a propensity toward violence. Like if you see, your parents abusing each other, you might be have a stronger propensity toward violence. But I know people who have come from abusive homes who are the most docile people I've ever met, and they avoid violence at all costs. So it shocks me that you know there's such you know a a blatant effort to misunderstand people, that you're willing to say, well, if you see this or do this, you're obviously going to become it. No, that's not true.
Hmm. Uh, and what is it? Throughout the history of psychology, there's always been this debate: is it nature versus nurture?
Hmm.
And I think it's only been within the last 10 or 20 years, maybe, where it's been argued that it's nature and nurture.
Hmm.
They both work together hand in hand, because we both have everybody has their genetics, their brain, their chemistry, whatever. And then they also have the environment in which they live, and everything plays a factor.
Hmm.
Again, it's kind of like like going on a diet. Like
Hmm.
you can control what you eat, but it's your genes that dictate your metabolism, or that sort of thing, allergies or whatever.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like that in life. Everyone is exposed to certain things, but those certain things don't necessarily dictate what happens to you.
Hmm.
And your genetics don't necessarily dictate your destiny.
Right.
So it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And again, which is why it's another reason why I'm kind of always of the all of the above mentality, because there are so many factors in everything.
And going back to what we said at the beginning of the podcast, um, being individuals, even a set of twins are individuals in some way. Being individuals, you're going to have different things that affect you in your life.
Mm,
If even in the case of twins, something that affects one twin may not have an effect on the other twin.
yeah, things mean very uh, meaning is very subjective.
Hmm.
Like kind of like what you're talking about with violent parents versus violent video games. When I'm playing a violent video game, there's really no meaning I apply to slaughtering zombies or that sort of thing. But when I see parents fighting or bickering or something, it means something. It hits
It,
close to home.
because
Um,
I think that, and I might be going way off the beaten path with this. I think there is a certain, if you're a child and you're in the room when your parents are being physically aggressive toward one another, I think that beyond visually seeing it, I think that there is somewhat of an energy that's in the room that you can feel. And I think that might be what affects somebody. But I think that as you evolve as a human and grow older, I think that as long as you have the wherewithal to look at something, with logic and rationale, I think that you're less inclined to have a propensity toward violence, even though you were impacted at that time by that energy that was in that room.
yeah, you can always control yourself,
Mhm.
to at least some degree, and that's when you have to interpret the life you've taken in up to this point, and then you can decide what actions you want to take.
Mhm.
Am I going to be violent? Am I going to be a peacekeeper? Am I going to withdraw? And honestly, maybe that's why a lot of people withdraw, because it's the neutral action. If they
It
if they
it's
know,
the Switzerland thing.
yeah,
It's
hmm,
their way of being Switzerland.
interesting, because hypothetically, those Norse countries are kind of withdrawn a little bit
Yeah.
from the goings on of
It
other
I
world
I
affairs.
just remember going through history class throughout school and always hearing that, through, um, conflict, that Switzerland always stayed neutral. And specifically with World War One and World War Two,
Yeah,
they always stayed neutral. So I've always heard that, people say, I'm not getting involved, consider me Switzerland.
God, that's an interesting point, and I'm wondering if maybe uh, that could be another driver for why people withdraw from society. Um, because hypothetically, if we live in a society slash economy where people are somewhat disempowered, um, but also people don't want to turn to the dark side, so to speak, then there's this neutral line people take, and it's withdrawing into their own lives.
Mhm.
And I would love it if we could change society, the economy in such a way where people do feel empowered to make positive change in the world.
Mhm.
Um, But that would be a very drastic change because the very fact that we live in a global economy now,
Yeah.
there are global systems at play that can be very intimidating to the individual, um, which is why when you perceive yourself as an individual within the context of this greater global system, it can be very overwhelming and
Hmm.
intimidating, um, which might just be why people just throw their hands up and be like, "Okay, time for video games."
It,
So
it's kind of that whole concept of small fish in a big pond.
yeah,
The way that you become, you know, self-aware is that you find what your purpose is in that you find what you're capable of and you find what your purpose is in that larger environment. That is what gives you purpose. And um I I had a thought and it just went poof.
I'm sorry.
um no, that's fine. Um I was going somewhere with that, but I forgot. But I think to move on to the second part of this, um, with people willingly withdrawing from social interaction, um, you and I had a good laugh at a video uh, that was posted by Whitney Cummings. And there are so many ways that this video can be described and that people can talk about this video. It all depends on your perspective. Whitney is actually one of my favorite comedians. I absolutely adore her. I started watching her when she was part of the table panel on Chelsea, or was it Chelsea Lately on the E channel. Chelsea Handler used to have her own talk show on the E channel called Chelsea Lately, and she would have comedians on at this like round table, and she would talk to them about certain things. And then my favorite episodes were when Whitney was on. And then Whitney got into getting her own series with another comedian, Chris D'Elia. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a decent comedian. He's not really my style. I don't really connect with a lot of the things that he talks about, but he's not a bad guy. Like he was a great actor in this series that he was in with Whitney. I'm just not necessarily a big fan of his stand up, but Whitney also got behind the camera and became one of the producers of a show that's no longer on. It actually ended, I think, last year. It was called Two Broke Girls, and
Oh,
um, Kat Dennings, who played in Two Broke Girls, was actually in the first Thor movie. She was Jane's assistant,
yes. Okay.
and um, but to get back to Whitney Cummings before I get too far off, um, Whitney posted a video, and obviously you know this, but just for our viewers, Whitney posted a video where she was talking about, automation taking over. And she was talking about how, robots were now personalized robots were now becoming a thing. And she then said, and I'll never be able to get this out of my head, the fact that I saw this. She then said that she had a robot made in her likeness. And then she brought the robot out. And while it wasn't entirely her likeness, it was close enough. And I was just sitting there dying laughing because I mean, even though it didn't sound like her, it was actually interacting with her and it cracked me up. And it got me thinking, especially when we started talking about this whole concept of, men, withdrawing within themselves. I want to talk about kind of the fun aspects of having a robot as long as we keep it PG-13. And maybe the negative aspects of having a robot, because I do think that people will look to automation when they no longer want to interact with humans, because they will get this misguided sense that the automation understands them, and they won't realize that they're not actually getting a human response.
Yeah. Did you ever see that movie Her? With
I don't recall that movie. The only movie I saw that even resembles automation of the same type we're talking about is, what I told you before, a couple days ago, was Weird Science. That was literally the only other time that I saw like some like a humanoid like robot type.
Interesting. Well, in the movie, there's this new app. Uh, it's called Her and or Him. If whichever side you go toward. Um, and it's this app that when you speak to it, it learns who you are and it becomes your cyber girlfriend or boyfriend. And Joaquin Phoenix is in it, and he becomes obsessed with this app. And eventually, along the lines, he learns that I guess spoilers. Okay, so in a nutshell, it's about these people who become obsessed with this app, and they perceive this AI as their significant other. And it's really interesting to see that relationship grow, and how these people grow as people
Yeah.
by the end of the movie. But I highly recommend it. It kind of touches upon that same subject. But going along with that question as to whether or not I would like a robot doppelganger, simple answer, yes, but I think it'd be awesome to have a robot self, just to hang out with, to trick people into thinking, hey, Ethan's in the room or Lanky's in the room.
Well, based on the one that we saw of Whitney's, you can obviously tell that it's not human enough to pass
Yeah,
as a human.
but I guess the
But
progress, the evolution of robotics.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, but along with those caveats, um, so for one thing, my own personal bias is I'm actually kind of bored of humans. I like my robots to look like robots. So if I had like a robot friend,
mhm.
like Bender or C3PO or Johnny Five or Wally, I'd be like, oh, cool! I have a robot friend. That's so cool. Um, I'd be all for
You
that.
realize that a fraction of a percentage of people are going to know who Johnny Five is, right? I know who he is, but people watching this back are going to go, "Who is Johnny Five?"
Then
Or
look it up.
if you want to go back even further, batteries not included.
Oh yeah. Uh, well, those would be fun too. Those are more, I would say, like insect robots. They're a little smaller. They can fly. Um,
All they were basically little
Saucers or
yeah, like little flying saucers.
yeah, yeah. So it was cool, but I think I'd like something a little bit more, I don't know, human sized or what have you.
Yeah.
Um, with the whether bipedal or on treads, I really don't care. On top of that, my robot friend would have to abide by Isaac Asimov's 3 rules of robotics. And just for the audience, they are a robot may not injure a human being or do any harm through inaction or allow a human being to come to harm. Yeah. Number 2, a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And then number 3, a robot must protect its own existence, and as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So self-preservation, ethically. And so yeah,
To appeal to your inner nerd. So what you're basically saying is you would never want a Dalek to be in your house.
no. That's very safe to say.
Because a Dalek actually does try to kill humans.
But on top of that, a Dalek is technically uh
A Dalek
is
is
it biotech?
just a vehicle
It's a
that's
vehicle.
run by this thing that looks like squished brain
A little
matter.
squid, like there's an eye, like
Yeah,
here, and then it has tentacles,
yeah,
and
yeah. It
so
looks
they're
like
driving the Dalek vehicle, so
yeah.
to speak.
Um,
And then, of course, Cybermen are cyborgs, so they have a human brain with
yeah,
a machine shell, so they're
yeah.
not robots either.
And then we
Uh,
have the little bastards that are called Empty Child. I never want to see one of those in real life.
but what about Cylons? Then, for one thing, you have the old Cylons from Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, see,
Who,
you lost me because I don't watch Battlestar.
I'm just a little bit more nerdy than you are, but
No, you just resemble Sheldon Cooper more than I do. Sheldon Cooper was obsessed with Battlestar Galactica. I don't know why.
well, okay.
I've tried to watch it, but nah.
But so in the old Battlestar Galacticas,
Mm.
you have this race of robots, the Cylons, trying to kill humans, humanity. Um, and then in a later season, or the later seasons, or I guess I could say series, um, they've evolved and they have this human-like chassis or shell, skin, whatever you want to call it. So they look and act human. And okay, so we probably don't have a whole lot of time to go into robot rights or
No.
an AI invasion or that sort of
Um,
thing.
but you know, I do want to touch on uh, what could be the potential negatives of having a robot. For me, it's like like you, I'm kind of becoming less and less interested in face to face. Well, I know we're face to face right now, but like literally face to face interaction with humans, just because I don't get that sort of, you know, positive energy anymore. Like people have changed so much because they can't get past certain things, so they're letting it affect how they interact with each other. So one side of me would love to have a robot, not necessarily a robot doppelganger,
Hmm,
because there are aspects of me that I do not need to see in a robot.
fair enough.
So I would I would go more toward a robot that resembles and emulates somebody that I would want to interact with, say Amy Pond.
Ah, Scottish.
Yes, and that's actually one of my requirements if I ever get a robot. It has to have a Scottish accent because I love Scottish accents.
It's all in the programming.
Yeah, I
So,
know.
yeah, I would, for my part, I mean, I do like face to face interaction, um, but I am also I've watched a lot of Star Wars and Star Trek, and I just get bored of seeing humans everywhere. I wouldn't mind seeing something a little different. So if there were like robots that look, yeah, I would argue robots that looked like, um, okay, so like the movie I, Robot,
Mhm.
they were very humanoid. Um, the newer models had like a kind of a synthetic human face, uh, which was white, and it was like kind of a gel that moved. The mouth moved and the eyes moved, which
Are
was
you
okay.
familiar? You're familiar with a movie? I think it's called Ex Machina.
Yes, I did see that.
I
I
haven't, admittedly, I haven't seen it, but um, I would think that the type of robots that we would see in existence would be more Ex Machina and less iRobot.
but that's the thing. She had a human face,
Yeah.
and I just get so bored of that. Like, give her either a robot face or an alien face, just something different. So I don't know. Humans are boring, in my opinion. But the sad thing is, in that movie, I did see that the protagonist kind of started to fall in love with the robot,
Mhm.
and it continually adapted and evolved to pass Turing tests, where she was asked, "What are you thinking right now? It's a sunny day today. How do you feel?" And, and that sort of thing. And she was becoming more and more human. And yes, by the end, she definitely became human. And again, spoilers. I don't want to reveal anything, but I highly recommend watching it. Uh, but it
Something I'm gonna mention that's probably going to age both of us, that nobody that watches this video is going to know. Do you remember growing up, there was a show, I don't remember what channel it was on, but there was a show called Small Wonder. It was about this little girl named Vicky, and she thought up and down that she was human. But we found out in the series that the father of um, the family actually built her. She was a robot.
I okay. The premise sounds familiar. I don't think I ever knew the title, but I was she like kind of a little girl with like a ponytail and like a red dress. Eh,
Yes, it was a
Okay.
red dress, and it had like the white frilly doily on the front,
Yeah. Okay.
kind of like the old 70s,
Huh.
and 80s stuff used to. Um, yeah, that's exactly what I think of when I think of a realistic humanoid robot is Small Wonder. Um,
Interesting.
I and then, I saw Teddy Ruxpin. Um, and granted, that's completely off topic, but you know, in Teddy Ruxpin, I believe there was a flap on the back that you opened and put the cassette
Cassette.
tape in.
Yeah. The
On
cassette tape.
Vicky, you opened up, there was a compartment on her back that you opened up to work on the wires of the robot. So that's what it makes me think of.
Jeez.
Um, but as far as, our fascination with robots has clearly been exposed. Um, do you think that the further we move toward automation and having more things that are mechanized, do you think that it's going to be that we prefer to interact more with something that is mechanized than something that is like us if we don't change course? Like, I want there to be, things that are mechanized, more things that are mechanized, but I think we need to change course as far as where we're going socially, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a very drastic drop in, human interaction once we have human-like animatronics.
How okay, how do you mean? Do you mean like a world of Wally where humans don't need to do anything except lie around, watch TV while robots serve us? Or do you mean like a robot friend? Or do you mean like robot dating?
I would say probably any of the above. think,
Oh.
a mix of the Jetsons, um, Flight of the Navigator, um, all of the above, basically. Like if we get, because I mean, if people were thinking about that kind of stuff back in those decades, there is obviously going to be more advanced ways of thinking of those concepts now. And I think the only thing that's keeping us from being able to bring those to fruition is the fact that as we have is that those type of concepts were not built back then. They were just conceptualized through the art of TV and movies. Whereas now we have the ability to physically conceptualize these things, but I think the only thing that prevents us from doing it is now the ability to do it costs 10 times more than it would have back then, where they could have built a simplified version of it and just built upon it, where we would have to build it from scratch.
Phew. I guess for the sake of answering, I'll just do. I'll just assume all three possibilities I described are would be in place in this
Okay.
hypothetical world. So if robots are designed to serve humans, do the menial tasks and that sort of thing, as well as build cars and construct bridges and that sort of thing. Um, Depending on our human nature, I guess, or our how we feel about our place in society, we would either become a higher minded society where we pursue art and philosophy and science and engineering and writing and
Because we have
whatever else,
automation or doing other things for us.
doing everything else.
But the negative side of that is we devolve and become
Idiocracy.
less capable of we become just something that exists instead of something that contributes.
Yeah, like in Wally, people they still had a mind. They could still speak and that sort of thing, but they just seemed incapable of taking care of themselves. Um, I would that's a danger, because I can definitely see that happening in our society, especially in a current environment where we inherently devalue teachers, art, science, um, anything that drives money is automatically hailed and put on a pedestal. But when we live in a society where everything's taken care of us and money doesn't matter, um, what happens to that drive? It's going to have that drive is going to have to be something higher minded, um, and we don't have a society right now that exercises that. Um,
I think basically, at least how I'm interpreting what you're saying, the further we go into the future where we have fewer things that mean something to us, that's going to basically be our downfall. Because I think the fewer things that we value or put value into, we're going to get to a point where we don't value anything, even our own existence.
exactly. And it becomes a world like Wall-E or Idiocracy where people are just seeking entertainment and distractions.
See, that
Um,
just makes me want Terry Crews as the president, though.
I, for everything I've seen him in, except for Idiocracy, I think he'd make a great president.
Well, I loved. Well, I've only seen parts of Idiocracy, but I knew that it was Terry Crews as president. I want him as president just because
uh,
he's actually the current host of America's Got Talent,
oh,
and
really?
he's amazing at it. I love how he's doing.
So I'm currently watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and
Yeah,
everybody's hilarious in that show. But yeah, I've just grown to admire him as an actor.
yeah.
Um,
To dial things back, because I want to dial things back and kind of wrap it all up with a pretty little bow. Um, going back to when we were talking about um, Jordan Peterson, and we were talking about, you know, finding the biggest thing that you can lift and carry it to find, basically as a means to find your purpose in life and realize what you're capable of doing. Um, I want you to explain. I mean, I know that we're still in the very early stages of it, but I think that you and I, like, our social situations individually are very different. Like, I think, um, before, you might have been maybe less inclined to be social, whereas I was more social. And I think the tables have kind of turned where, we have, a video chat every other day, basically. And, you're always telling me how you're getting together with friends and, you're doing this or you're doing that, you're going out and doing this. Whereas I ever since moving to Virginia, I mean, there was a time where I was still as active as I was in New York, but it's kind of, decreased as time has gone on. Um, but I think with the things that we are doing now, and I know we haven't talked about this in a podcast yet, but I think that the projects that you and I have taken on together have basically been the definition of finding purpose.
Yeah,
And I feel productive, and I feel like the things that we're doing are, actually going to manifest things for us.
yeah. Uh,
So if you, I mean, from the artist's perspective, if you want to explain what we're doing, because what I've done as far as the description down below, I've put a PayPal link in the description because there are projects that we are doing right now that will be, available and beneficial to the public. Um, but as we've talked about, things that have purpose have, they require money.
mm,
Um, so the one thing that I don't typically touch on that I think may be important right now is that anybody who's watching this, if you find that you like the things that we talk about, if you find that you like the content, on my channel with me individually, or I will put Lanky's link in the description as well over to his animation channel. If you like that, I'm going to ask that you like, comment, share, and subscribe any of the podcasts that he and I have done. Share this channel, share any of the individual videos. Um, we are working toward developing a comic book series, and actually, with the way that my brain has been going, we ended up, manifesting ideas for certain or for several different comic book series that we're developing. But we're in the process of trying to develop a comic book series that we want to release by January 1st. We're in the process of developing a movie script that we hope to have done by next summer so that we can start casting for the movie. And also with my love for the nonprofit world, we're working on a news publication that will be online um, that reports on uh, nonprofits, all of that sort of thing. And it will be basically a means for people to reference what nonprofits are legit and what nonprofits may be, ones to avoid that are not really above board, as they say. Um, so I'm gonna let Lanky talk about, the more artistic aspect of, the comic book, the movie, anything we're doing artistically. But if you like what we're doing, I do have a PayPal link in the description below. And if even with creating the podcast, if you like what we're doing, any sort of contribution will be greatly appreciated because it'll help us be able to advance the objectives that we have and be able to better connect with the people that, are trying to connect with us. So I'm going to let Lanky, because you have all of the details for the projects that we're doing, I'm going to let you kind of explain them, as we go into ending the podcast.
Yeah, like as with anything, it takes time. So as we're working on these projects, uh, income can become an issue. So,
Yeah.
and I've always been an advocate for funding the arts. Sadly, throughout history, it's always been the rich at the end of their life finally forking over their fortunes to museums and artists and works of art and that sort of thing. But yeah, we're working on a comic book where the protagonists are yeah, handy capable. I
Well,
guess.
it's a brother and sister. The it's an older sister, younger brother. The younger brother is much like myself. He is in a wheelchair because he has spina bifida. And
Hmm.
the one thing that I have always envisioned, especially because of the camp that I went to as a kid, um, the one thing that has always stuck with me is I know that, superhuman abilities um, are things that don't exist. But I do believe that the abilities that one has can be built upon. They're like building blocks. And I think that this story, shows that an outside force helps these kids build upon the abilities they already have, but they're able to explore those abilities in a different way that they didn't see before.
And yeah, so we're developing the story for the first issue. We have several ideas for future issues. Um, and yeah, I guess we're looking for funding for publishing, as well as our own time investment in drawing, writing for both the comic book and the script for the movie. Um, it everything costs something, sadly.
But I think, just so people don't think that we're trying to, just get money for nothing. The reason I bring it up in this specific episode is because I think that, you know, when you are starting to feel like you're trying to find what you're capable of, or, what kind of meaning your life has, I think that I think it's natural to look at something that you're capable of doing. And I honestly, until we started this process, I didn't think that I had the ability to create something artistic. And while Lanky is doing, the actual, illustrations, he and I are both able to collaborate on the story itself.
Hmm.
I have no drawing ability. I can't even draw a straight line, but um, we're collaborating on a story and we're finding our strengths. And I think that's the whole message that people need to embrace, is finding your strengths will ultimately help you kind of steer away from excommunicating yourself from social situations. If you find your strengths, you're going to find a purpose within those strengths.
And also
And
make sure that you find value in those strengths.
yeah,
Um,
because I think that with, if you find if you find a purpose, you're going to find value. I think those two go hand in hand.
yeah,
But I really feel like, conversationally, as far as my content goes on my channel, these podcasts really help in the sense that my whole purpose is to put content up that creates a conversation. And, finding purpose that will kind of help other people have something to relate to. I think that the comic book, the movie, and people who are interested in the nonprofit world, I think that what we're doing with these projects will ultimately, uh, help them connect to something. But I think it's helped us find a purpose to drive us to do something more than existing. I think that it's given us a momentum that, at least for my part, I don't really know that I've had this type of momentum before. But I think that it's important to have it because it gives me something to look forward to, you know, when I wake up and I can think of, a random idea. And then, one of the 3 days that Lanky and I end up video conferencing, we can talk about it and we can evolve either my idea or his idea, and we can combine the two and, come up with something that is extremely collaborative. And I think collaboration is extremely important in a time where we're seeing a lot of disconnect between people.
that kind of brings it full circle.
Yeah. So we did run a little bit later than normal, just about 10 minutes, but I do want to thank, everybody that stopped in, uh, and, anybody who is, making it to the end of this video, seeing it as a video on demand. Um, but yeah, like, comment, share, subscribe. And if you have anything that has given you purpose, let us know in the comments because it very well could, manifest into something that helps us create something, in the future. And I think working together, us as individual cogs can create a larger cog that helps the bigger picture. And I think that we have to remember that. So when you're looking at something that seems overwhelming, bring it back down to its most basic elements and see how you can build it up. See how your brain builds it up because it's got to work for you to be able to understand why it exists. And as long as something works for you and doesn't hurt the person next to you, I think that we will be a lot better off in the way that we approach anything in life because we can't just exist. Just existing means that our only purpose is to live and die. That's not what we're here for. We're here for, you know, lifting each other up and coming up with the most insane ideas that actually end up working. So, let us know down below the things that give you purpose. If you're still looking for your purpose, reach out to us, have a conversation with us, and, you know, we will be glad to kind of provide our input, but also make your brain work in a way that you probably never thought. So we will see you next Wednesday. Bye.